Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 23rd of July of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where during the previous 24 hours the Russians have improved their positions significantly. And first let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction. We have small changes through the western parts of the Zaporizhzhia front line, especially in the area of the city of Stepnohorsk, and these are the changes on the ground. As you can see, the Russians have improved their positions during the previous 24 hours according to different pro-Russian sources, and the most important thing is that the Russians answered the Stepnohorsk citadel. We are talking about this territory with multi-story buildings, which means that the Russians are recapturing the city of Stepnohorsk and forcing the Ukrainians to fall back further in the northern direction. The Russians started their counter-offensive operation in the Zaporizhzhia direction several days ago, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. So, for example, this is the situation by the end of the 19th of July, this is the end of the 18th of July, and this is the situation by the end of the 15th of July of 2026, and this is approximately the moment when the Russians launched their offensive. So once again, this is the end of the 14th of July of 2026, and this is already the end of the 23rd of July, and as you can see, the Russians improved their position significantly. Moving further, now let's talk about the northern Zaporizhzhia direction. This is another area where the Russians launched a counter-offensive operation. As of now, the Russians are tasked to cut the pocket to the south of the river of Vovcha. The Ukrainians during February and May, between February and May of 2026, launched their counter-offensive operation. Let's take a look at the map at the end of the 31st of March of 2026. This is exactly the moment when the Ukrainians managed to probably get the biggest progress through the northern Zaporizhzhia counter-offensive. So as you can see, all these villages were considered as a gray zone or the territories under complete Ukraine control, but later the Russians regrouped after they finished the battle for the city of Gulyapolya and for several villages to the west of the city of Gulyapolya. The Russians finished regrouping and began their own counter-offensive operation, and basically 3 months after, so by the end of the 23rd of July of 2026, the Russians, as you can see, improved their position significantly and are about to cut the pocket to the south of the river of Vovcha. So most likely by the end of August of 2026 or even earlier, the Russians will finish the battle for the river of Vovcha, and the Russians most likely will take all these territories under complete control. This will allow the Russians to continue offensive operation further along the northern shore of the river of Vovcha with the purpose to continue offensive operation further in the direction of the cities of Pavlograd, Sinelnikova, and many other different towns and cities in the Dnipropetrovsk direction. Now let's move further and let's talk about the most important direction, about the Dnipropetrovsk direction, or telling the truth, we can call this direction even the Kharkiv direction, because if Russians are able to break through Ukraine's defenses through this area, then from these positions the Russians have all chances to continue advancing further, even in the direction of the city of Kharkiv, with the purpose to encircle the city or at least to establish complete control over the territory. So let's discuss in details what have happened since the end of the 22nd of July of 2026. According to different sources, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly around the settlement of Novopavlivka, and these are the changes on the ground. As you can see, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their positions, or basically maintained positions, between the villages of Moravka and Novopavlivka, and the Russians continue advancing further in the western direction with the purpose to cut the road to 428 between the settlements of Mizhova and Novopavlivka. The Russians began the battle for the settlement of Novopavlivka probably more than a year ago, and since that moment the Russians have carried out 4 or 5 or maybe even 10 attempts with the purpose to establish complete control over the settlement, but all those attacks carried out by Russians were repelled by the Ukrainian side, and the Russians were always forced to fall back towards the river of Vovcha. So now the Russians decided to outflank the settlement of Novopavlivka from the north and from the northeast with the purpose to cut the logistics. So which means that the battle for the city of Novopavlivka becomes answers its decisive phase. Furthermore, the Russians from the area of the settlement of Novopavlivka improved their positions through the southern parts of the settlement of Sergeyevka, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 22nd of July, and this is already the end of the 23rd of July of 2026. This information was provided by pro-Russian sources, and the Russians captured the territory along the river of Balka-Matyushina. So basically, these are already the southern outskirts of the settlement of Sergeyevka. Now let's move further and let's discuss the most important update of the previous 24 hours, probably not even of the previous 24 hours, but probably of the previous 48 hours, because yesterday, if you remember, we were just talking about the city of Dobropillia, and these are, for example, the changes between the 21st and the 22nd of July of 2026. Just yesterday, we talked that the Russians improved their position significantly through the city of Dobropillia. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians continued their offensive operation, and this morning, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the Russians, as a result of clashes, established complete control over the settlement of BILYTSKE. As of the end of the 23rd of July of 2026, the Russians still haven't published even a single video with flags where we can see real confirmations that the Russians established control over the settlement, but I believe that tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, the Russians will do this. The Russians are waiting. Probably the Ukrainians will try to counterattack, because if they raise a flag, if they show a video with flags, the Ukrainians have always possibilities to counterattack this exactly point and to re-establish the Ukrainian flag and to claim that the settlement is still under complete control of the armed forces of Ukraine. So that is why the Russians are waiting. The Russians are waiting when they're able to create a gap between the city of BILYTSKE and the line of combat contact. And when the Russians create a gap like this, then the Russians will publish the video. Anyway, the Russians, as you can see, established control over the city of BILYTSKE, and this is a very important city. Right now, in front of your screens, we can see a satellite picture of this city. As you can see, there are lots of multi-story buildings, there are lots of blocks that the Russians can use to concentrate troops. Of course, many buildings and constructions of the city have been reduced to ruins as a result of clashes, because the battle for BILYTSKE started a year ago, somewhere around November of 2025, during the battle for Pokrovsk-Mirnograd agglomeration. So that is why the city has been damaged significantly since that moment. But still, there are lots of positions that the Russians can use to accumulate and concentrate forces before moving further in the direction of the settlement of Dobropillia, the village of Dobropillia, and the city of Dobropillia itself. As many sources stated, as many experts reported, if Ukrainians lose control over the city of Dobropillia, the Russians would be able to enter the operational space of the Dnipro region, and from these positions, the Russians would be able to continue advancing further deep inside of the central part of the territory of Ukraine without any resistance from the Ukrainian side due to configuration of these territories. There are lots of villages, small villages, and there are no places where the Ukrainians can control, consolidate troops of brigade level or division level or something like this. And of course, from the area of the city of Dobropillia, the Russians will continue offensive operation further in the northern direction with the purpose to outflank the settlement of Kramatorsk and to attack the Ukrainian positions from behind. As for the Druzhkivka-Sloviansk direction, during the previous 12 hours, we haven't received anything special. The Russians continue attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine through the settlement. Lots of videos were published on this matter. The Russians continue softening defenses of the armed forces of Ukraine through the entire agglomeration with the purpose to prepare the foothold before the beginning of the real ground battle. As for the Sloviansk direction, during the previous 12 hours, we also haven't received anything special. The Russians continue attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine through this territory, but we believe that in coming days we may receive additional changes on the ground, especially on the line between the settlements of Liman and Nikolaevka. As for the northern directions, during the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded in the area of the settlement of BILYTSKE, and these are the changes on the ground. This is the end of the 22nd, and this is the end of the 23rd of July. The Russians improved their positions toward a small village by the name of Ivanivka. These are the changes, and the Russians managed to enter the settlement of Yurivka from the northwest. The Russians continue advancing, and in coming days we expect that the map would be adjusted again, and the group of forces north, as well as the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, would confirm this information. So as we can see, the Russians continue their major offensive operation, and the most important thing that right now time works on Russians, because the winter is approaching, and we understand that, which means that the winter is closer, which means that the Ukrainians have less forces to control the situation, because we know that most likely the upcoming winter could be decisive winter for the entire special military operation, and this is the only reason why Zelensky and Ukraine began attacking deep inside of the territory of Russia, attacking oil refineries, warehouses, and so on. The Ukrainians are tasked to force the Russians to start the negotiation process with the Ukrainian side. But we need to understand a very important situation. The Ukrainians are not tasked right now with the United States of America to finish the conflict. Ukraine right now needs just one thing. They need an energy truce. Zelensky suggests a three-way meeting between Russia, the United States, and Ukraine could take place this summer. I think there will be a three-way meeting then. Of course, all of this needs to be done before autumn. I believe we need to work hard on this. If we are up to us, it would have already taken place in July, but not everything depends on us, Zelensky said. He added that he had received proposals from the Americans, which they would also discuss with Moscow. We have reports that Zelensky have already held talks with President Trump's envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Furthermore, we have statements from the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. So what is happening right now? Zelensky understands that most likely if there is no energy truce, energy ceasefire during the upcoming winter of 2026-2027, then most likely the Russians will have all chances to destroy the entire energy infrastructure in Ukraine and to create a total and complete blackout of Ukraine for many months during the entire period of time through the winter. Which means, and of course we understand, if it happens, this will force people, civilians, to leave the territory of Ukraine. There would be millions of people will leave Ukraine in the direction of different countries and so on, and this can lead to complete collapse of the state. So that is why Zelensky is forced to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia, and the most important demands from the Ukrainian side is to begin the negotiations, more precisely the energy negotiations. Zelensky and the United States of America propose Russia to stop any attacks on objects of energy infrastructure, so the Ukrainians don't attack oil refineries, fuel depots, and many other different things. The Russians don't attack objects of energy infrastructure of Ukraine, especially during the upcoming winter period of time. So this is the most important situation. Now the Russians are thinking whether to accept this proposal or not. If the Russians reject this proposal, then most likely before the beginning of parliament elections on the territory of Russia, the Ukrainians would try to attack every single warehouse, every single oil base or oil depot of Russia with drones and missiles, and they would try to destroy as many as possible of them, trying to create economical crisis on the territory of Russia that could lead to unpredictable consequences before elections. The Russians are tasked just to survive during this period of time and to finish the elections on the territory of Russia. And when it happens, there are very high chances that the Russians may even announce mobilization with the purpose to sharply increase the number of forces along the line of combat contact and to open the only and the final front line with Ukraine. We are talking about the most northern one, so this territory between Bryansk and Chernigov region. If you take a look at the map, you're gonna see that the Russians and the Ukrainians are fighting along the entire line of combat contact between the city of Sumy and basically the city of Kherson. So here we have clashes along the entire line of combat contact without exceptions. The Russians are attacking the Ukrainians everywhere through this territory. And there is just one part of the border between Ukraine and Russia. We are talking about this part of the territory where no clashes have been recorded, probably since the beginning of the special military operation or since the moment when the Russians retreat from the Kiev region. So that is why why the Russians probably consider this territory as a new front line, probably even during this autumn if they announce mobilization. So that is why the Ukrainians understand that if they and the Russians are not able to create or to accept or to achieve a ceasefire, energy truce, then most likely the Russians will both mobilize troops and the Russians will destroy the energy infrastructure of Ukraine. Another important thing, of course, is the battle for the Black Sea. The Ukrainians started the Black Sea War, and as a result of attacks, the Russians suffered huge losses with vessels, with tanks. And for example, during the previous 24 hours, it was reported that a cargo ship carrying coal from the Russian port of Taman to Trabzon was attacked in the Black Sea. One member of the crew was killed, and the 3 others were injured, according to different sources. And the Russians, from their side, continue attacking vessels and ships through the western parts of the Black Sea in the area of the city of Odessa. And during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of additional videos on this matter. Lots of vessels were damaged and destroyed. We can see a fire. We can see videos published by official pro-Russian sources where we can see these vessels attacked by Russians with Geran 4 secret type of drone. Lots of vessels were destroyed, and these attacks carried out by the Russians led to the situation that the European countries stopped using the western parts of the Black Sea for their purposes. For example, the world's largest shipping company, Maersk, has suspended operations in Ukraine due to the escalation of Russian attacks on Ukrainian ports. Vessels are being rerouted to the Romanian port of Constanta. Furthermore, we had a report that ships have ceased entering Ukrainian ports as of July of 23rd. The entry of vessels into the Black Sea ports of the Ukraine has been suspended due to the threat of Russian attacks. Just yesterday, between 4 and 5 vessels were still entering the ports. While this represented a limited volume, some activity was maintained. So as you can see, and as we discussed, in coming 2-3 days, in coming weeks, we won't see even a single activity through the Black Sea with both neither from the Russian nor from the Ukrainian side. And the only way to restore the use of the Black Sea is energy truce, and this is exactly what the Western countries, Ukraine, are trying to force the Russians to accept. The Russians right now are thinking, the Russians are saying that there is something like Anchorage agreement between the United States of America and the Russian Federation, but we know that according to Marco Rubio, the United States of America rejected the idea of Anchorage because the current situation probably changed the game. Now the Ukrainians are able to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia, and now the United States of America as well as the Ukrainian side are waiting for more and new proposals from the Russian side. But the Russians are thinking what to do, because if there were no elections this summer, probably the Russians won't even think about this. But the problem is that in 2 months the Russians are going to have parliament elections, and of course they want to enter this period of time with good situation in economy, with gasoline, with fuel through the state. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to happen next. But obviously, before and the energy truce accepted by both parties, we would continue watching mid-range and long-range strikes carried out both by the Russians and the Ukrainian side. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel remains to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.